and we're about to talk a little football with the show I listen to on the way in the morning, Dusty and Danny on Sirius XM. They get me up and going in the morning, and I cannot tell you how many times I scream in the car at our next guest, Brownie. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Oh, you get upset with Danny Kanell?
Danny Kanell. Every morning, man.
He is with us now from Sirius XM. As Dunaway said, Dusty and Danny. Danny Kanell on Twitter is where you follow him. What is up, Danny? How are you?
What's up, fellas? How we doing? Great to be on with you. Fan of your show as well. You know, Jim was just talking about, calling some baseball this past weekend. College baseball is one of my favorites. One of the things I missed the most when I was at ESPN, I used to get to call college baseball in the spring. So I called several regionals, several super regionals, never got called up to the big leagues to get to Omaha. I think college baseball is some of the best. It's like one of the best kept secrets out there. I love covering college baseball, but it's great to be on. I know we're talking football. It's great to be on with you guys.
One of the things you don't want, though, in the first of a 9-inning doubleheader each, is a 20-13 game between nationally ranked Alabama and Lipscomb. I was sitting here going, are you kidding me? We're going to be here all day.
20-13?
Yeah, 20-13. Yes. It's crazy.
Hey, I don't know what the number was, and final thing on baseball, Danny, but you being a Florida State guy, Mike Martin,
wow.
So painful watching that guy go to Omaha and unable to win a championship. I mean, how many College World Series appearances was? And, just percentages. You would think you get to one of these, you find a way to win one. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's one of the more perplexing things about, his career is how he didn't at least get one championship. I mean, the amount of success he had, the amount of trips he had. Early, I know there was a style of play philosophy. When they used to play at Rosenblatt, used to come in with bombers, and his play was a little bit more defense and, a little bit more of the small ball type play. And then you figured, all right, well, maybe when they moved stadiums, brought things in a little bit, that could be the opportunity. For whatever reason, it didn't go, though. But I played my first 2 years for 11, as they called them. And, as much as I love playing for Coach Bowden and rave about him as a human being, I would put Mike Martin on the same pedestal right there as far as what he meant as a coach to the players that came through there. Just an absolute legend, both on and off the field. And sad, it's a sad day for Florida State. And, in the last couple of years, we've lost two legends of the sports that they coached in. But, he was an unbelievable coach and just one of the more inexplicable things. Sometimes luck comes into play, but just could not get it done.
Danny Kanell with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. Dusty and Danny in the morning, Sirius XM. You also see Danny on CBS Sports. And I want to talk to you first about Florida State's home in the ACC. As we play this thing out, landscape in the future, do you think Florida State's on the move sooner rather than later? Is that something, as a STEAM alum, you hope they'll find a home in the Big Ten or the SEC?
It depends on what you mean sooner rather than later. Like, is soon before the 2036, the time the TV contract goes out? Then yes, I definitely hope it's sooner than that. I ultimately, when I had this conversation, if you would have asked me this 6 months ago, I was still kind of holding out hope that they would be able to survive and stay in the ACC, because I don't like the conference realignment. I don't like the fact that we're morphing into these two super leagues that we're eventually going to get to. I like regionality. I like, as much as it's kind of driven me crazy, I like the conference bragging rights and the different styles of play and being able to test your mettle against each other in non-conference games, as opposed to going to this one, super league, which it feels like we're going. But to answer your question, I do think it'll be sooner rather than later. I would guess in the next 2 or 3 years is probably when you see Florida State fight their way out of the ACC. Again, I don't like that there's an ugly exit. I don't like the way it's all played out publicly. And Florida State has kind of put it all out there, on full display and had to take the ACC to court. I wish there was a better way we could do this. But unfortunately, that is the harsh reality of the world that we live in. And as Florida State's board has pointed out several times, long term, it's just not sustainable financially to try to make up for the gap that you have to go to your boosters and you have to raise those funds to make up for that $40-50 million a year, and it's not sustainable. So they had to do what the college football world has dictated to them, and that's be a part of the future of college football, which at the higher end of the game feels like it's going to be in the Big Ten or SEC.
Danny Kanell is with us, CBS and Sirius XM. Dusty and Danny in the morning on Sirius XM. They do a great job there. He's on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. Long term, I'm going to leave UCLA out of this because I don't think they belong in this question. Long term, more success in their new home, Texas, Oklahoma, or USC?
Long term, I do think, That's a great question. I'll say Texas, and it does feel like I'm trying to guard against recency bias because Oklahoma would probably be if we asked this 2 years ago, it'd be Oklahoma. So
right.
you have to look at program health, where it's all been. On Cover 3, we actually ranked the top 10 football programs right now. And it was really tricky. There were hands down, there were top 4 or 5, and Texas was in that every time. Oklahoma was not, USC was not. For that jogging my memory, I'll say Texas. I mean, they really are coming in with some momentum. They have stability at their head coach. They do have resources that can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the SEC. They have, access to recruiting, which is huge, and having, players within the state being from Texas, being able to pull from the area. And then I would probably say Oklahoma would be next. But then I think you also have to consider the quality of the Big Ten. That opens up the door for USC to enter this conversation. But the Big Ten, I think, is going to be fascinating to see different styles of play, because I've been one that's been very critical of Big Ten's offenses and saying, are we sure those Big Ten defenses aren't a little bit overrated? Because those Big Ten offenses weren't really challenging them with modern concepts and being able to, run a lot of RPOs and run a lot of these high-flying offenses. So we're about to find out. And I do think maybe the Big Ten defenses are going to have more success against USC's offense than we think. And there's a lot of uncertainty about the travel, what that could mean. And the fact that you're pairing up USC going with other quality opponents that are going with it. I'll say it's in the order of Texas, Oklahoma, then USC.
Sticking in the Big Ten, only in Columbus could you be 56-8, 39-3 in conference, and people want a new head coach. Now, it looks like Ryan Day, after losing 3 consecutive games to Michigan, is all in. I mean, you get Chip Kelly, Quinshon Judkins. Now you've got a quarterback in Will Howard. How improved will they be at the quarterback position with Will Howard, or are you buying Ohio State this year?
I am. I don't see how you can't. I'm buying them to win the Big Ten for sure. I think it's going to be really tough for anybody to overtake Georgia and the talent they have coming back and the juggernaut they are. But as far as Ryan Day goes, one of the best parts about them losing to Michigan 3 years in a row, there's nothing, Ohio State fans won't like this, but it actually did light a fire under their collectives, all of them, for people to come to the table and say, we're sick and tired of this. We don't want to lose anymore. What's it going to take for us to go out and get the best talent in the country, which is why they've been able to do it, why they can get in these bidding wars and go outbid everybody else to get a guy like Will Howard, to get Caleb Downs, to get Quinshon Judkins, and say, whatever it takes, we're sick and tired of it. So it is sort of a blessing in disguise. But I also think the upgrade, it's tricky to call it an upgrade when you go from the former mentor going to mentee, but I do think the relationship that Ryan Day has with Chip Kelly, I think that's going to be a really good marriage, because they're similar philosophically, but I do think it'll help alleviate some of the game day responsibilities to Ryan Day, where sometimes he's gotten away from it or hasn't, the overall, because it's been a knock against Ohio State. You could tell it bothered Ryan Day after the Notre Dame game. It was like, people said we couldn't be physical. Well, it didn't really matter against Notre Dame. It was more of a question against Michigan. And that's been the question. So now he can kind of look at the overall big picture of this team and say, all right, maybe we do need to be physical up front and on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe we do need to make slightly different tweaks in game day, preparation and game day play calling. And now that he can kind of have some of that taken off his plate and give it over to Chip, I think that'll be a huge benefit. And I don't think this is anything anybody else hasn't said. And I like Bill O'Brien, but I think, they lucked into having Bill O'Brien go take the BC job, getting Chip Kelly to come be their offensive coordinator, because of the relationship they have, and because for Will Howard specifically, I think he's somebody that's really going to flourish in Chip and Ryan Day's system, because he's pretty athletic. He can run. He can take advantage of in the game. He's got a big-time arm. So I do think that offense is going to get much improved from what it was last year.
You're a Florida guy, chum in the water. This is what this question is. Why not, if we go to 14, why not an automatic bye for the SEC champion, Danny? Why not?
Oh, I mean, I think it's just the overall fairness of the sport. I mean, I think even you have to always protect against every situation, because here's the thing that bothers me. Most of the years, it probably is going to be the SEC or Big Ten champ, right? They just already have that reputation coming in. If there's a 1 or even 2-loss team, we've already seen the committee and the people that make these decisions. They're not afraid to give the nod to the SEC, or really the SEC. I mean, the Big Ten, yes, Ohio State got in without winning its division, but they're not afraid to say, we don't have to just watch undefeated and give that the ultimate prize. Like, you can have a one-loss team be ranked over an undefeated team. We've seen that. So I would say 9 times out of 10, the SEC and Big Ten are going to get that. But what about the times that maybe there's a Clemson or there's a Florida State or a Miami or a team from the Big 12? A team that goes and runs the table and has a pretty, like Clemson, this upcoming year's schedule will be a great example. If they beat Georgia week 1, which is a massive if, but in this future landscape, if they schedule out a conference like that, and then they go through a year where they would beat Florida State, they would beat a Miami, they would beat some of these other top tier teams, a Notre Dame, and they're undefeated, why would, like, that to me would be incredibly unfair, and the optics of that would be very, to me, unhealthy to the sport, where a lot of people outside the SEC and Big Ten already look at it with a lot of speculation, saying, oh, the game is tilted way too much in favor of the SEC and Big Ten. Why would we want that to continue? Why not at least protect? So if there is a deserving, team that's outside the Big Ten or SEC that is undefeated, that did have a quality schedule, why wouldn't we protect that from happening? So I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think they're going to get the automatic bye, but I'm glad that the ACC and Big 12 have, at least clapped back against that.
But, this week I will watch teams I have not watched play basketball all year, simply because I know it's for a spot in the tournament. In college football, there's just nothing they can really do to replicate that. I mean, that's like, and I don't know that they're trying to do that, Danny, but you cannot replicate that in football. It's just not going to translate the same way.
Correct. But doesn't that make it more compelling if those top twos are still open going into championship week?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
wouldn't
that make it more compelling? Because you'd have more teams to be fighting for that. That's why I think it's better to leave it open and still, like, that's the protection I think that the new format, whether it's 12 or 15 or 14, has against, because the biggest knock against expanding the playoffs is, the regular season's not going to matter. The regular season's going to become irrelevant. But that's why I think some of the protections that are in there, first round bye, incentivizing getting a home playoff game, like seeding should still matter. That protects against a team from resting their starters in a championship game, resting them the back end of the season, saying, you know what, we're already locked in. We know where we're going to be. That's why I do think that as much things as you can keep up for grabs where you need to impress and keep winning will protect against that, regular season. Because I think November is going to matter way more than it's ever mattered before.
Yeah, I will say the 1 seed had no meaning in the 14 playoff. I mean, it was nice.
Right.
It was an honor. But, I mean, you were no better off being the 1 than the 4 in the 14.
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't matter at all whatsoever, except for Florida State when they had to travel and play Oregon in the Rose Bowl when they were undefeated.
That is true.
Yeah, you could have played that on another planet. It wouldn't have mattered. Hey, if I put the number at a half, the over-under at a half, Kalen DeBoer championships, national championships at Alabama, over the half, under the half?
If he survives the first 3 years, then it's over. You should be able to win at Alabama, and he's proven he can win everywhere he's been. But to me, that's why it's so crucial for him to get off to a strong start. Because we know he's a good coach. We know his past track record. But what we don't know is how that fits in the SEC. And if history tells you, the SEC is one of those unique places where it is different. I mean, it just means more is one of the most accurate, catchphrases and mottos that we've ever seen, because it does mean more in the SEC. And it means especially more at Bama. And what happens if they go 8-4 this year? Like, all of a sudden, he's almost in the hot seat year 2, which is insane that we would even say that. But we all know the reality of what will be happening in Tuscaloosa if that's the case. And, God forbid it's, losing to some teams that you haven't lost to in 15 years, losing to a Kentucky, or somebody like that. I don't even know if they're on their schedule next year, but you know what I mean? Like, losing a game you're not supposed to at Bama. Like, all of a sudden that comes. But if he comes in, and I don't think he has to win right away. I don't think he has to go to the playoffs right away. I think if he goes 9-3, which is right around the win total where it is, 9-3, I think you're all right, we can feel like we can work with this. Then you give him a full recruiting cycle, and then you kind of build. But again, you're still looking at him. I think the Bama fans are, with some skepticism, and that bar has been set so high. So for me, I think it all depends on whether he survives those first 3 years. But if he does, and if they are patient in air quotes, because nobody's patient in this country at any place, but especially in the SEC. If they're patient with him and support him and give him the full backing like they gave Nick, then yeah, I think he should win one.
Damn it, Danny. How do you come on here, Danny, and not say anything negative about the SEC? You so positive. This is not. I mean, this is like going to see Ric Flair and he doesn't give me the woo. or any of that.
Because I'm not that bad. I'm not. So that's the thing to me has always been, a lot of it's been blown out of proportion. But I will say this, over the past 5 years, 8 years, I haven't been able to have as much fodder because I don't, like, the SEC has become this dominant force. And when I got into broadcasting, I was coming out totally new to the game, was kind of back in college football after being in the NFL and being a professional athlete for 10 years. And I remember working at ESPNU in Charlotte, and it was around the time the LSU-Bama rematch took place, and Oklahoma State was there. And it just kind of bothered me that it was just accepted that you'd have 2 one-loss teams and one lost, and it was like, well, why are we going with this one? Like, and it was just SEC is better. And we heard a term a lot that was the SEC is head and shoulders above everybody else. So I would always push back against it and kind of remind people, it's like, hey, wait a second, there's other, conferences that play tackle football as well. And so I really leaned into that, but I also really believed it. And I do think, like, and you went back, if you looked at the NFL draft numbers, it was tight. Like, the SEC was the most, maybe it was the ACC one year, maybe it was the Big 12, maybe it was the Pac-12 one year, who would be like only 2 or 3 players less drafted. And then, like, it wasn't that big of a disparity. And so, like, that narrative kind of started, and they started their run, and then slowly but surely you saw that gap as they tried to say it more and started emphatically making the case the SEC is king, the SEC is best, and then started using it to recruit, using it to get new TV deals. It started to become like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I give them a ton of credit for doing it, but the more times you said it, the more times people believed it. So then all those things that they get accused of, and at the time, I didn't feel it was valid. Like, you got more credit for beating a conference opponent, and you didn't get dinged as bad for losing to a conference opponent. That used to drive me nuts. Well, now, especially with the schedule we are moving forward, like, what am I going to pound the table and say that Florida's schedule is overrated? Like, that's really hard to do. Like, that schedule is just, it is what it is. Same thing across the board. So I do think there will be some things that will set me off, and there'll be some perks that they get, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. And to their credit, they took advantage of it and ran with it to where there's not really much of an argument. I don't want to lose credibility and sit here and say, well, the ACC is better than the SEC. That would lose credibility. How big is that gap? We could debate, we could argue, but it's just become fact. Yeah. Of what it is. And like, I used to be able to debate that. Now it's like, it's not as much fun.
Well,
like, I could be the Ric Flair, and come in here and make some wild, outrageous claims, but I just don't want to lose credibility.
I would say this because of Clemson. If I ask you moving forward, more playoff wins, Dabo at Clemson, or I'll give you the combination of Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss and Hugh Freeze at Auburn.
Right. It's not even close.
So you would take the SEC?
Oh, you're saying moving forward.
Yeah, moving forward.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I will give you Dabo and Clemson, or the combination of Hugh Freeze and Lane Kiffin.
Prop bet here.
I'll say Dabo. I don't think Dabo's going anywhere. And again, this kind of goes to the path to get to the playoff, because especially go to the 2-team playoff or the 2-team automatic bids for the ACC. I think it's still going to be really challenging for somebody that's not Georgia, that's not Bama. We'll see who else kind of shakes out here as it's going. And yeah, like, Ole Miss might get that spot this year, but they're for the first time dealing with a lot of hype and expectations. And now that they've got that bullseye on their back, like, how do they handle it? So I'll say Dabo, because I do think Dabo still has a healthy culture. I think and hope he's going to embrace NIL slightly more. He's never going to be the portal king that Lane Kiffin is. But I mean, he's essentially, what Dabo Swinney has tried to do is like, could you imagine a team in the NFL saying, we're just going to draft. We're not going to even pay attention to free agency. I mean, that's what Dabo has done for the last, 3 years since NIL has been open. And I think he's finally come around a little bit. I think if he ever embraces that fully, then it won't be even a question mark.
Yeah. Our buddy Michael Alford, who's the AD down there, I'm sure he's gotten in your ear saying, man, Danny, you got to tone down the SEC rhetoric. We may need that bid someday, man. We may need that bid someday.
Here's, because I get asked all the time, what are you going to do if Florida State joins the SEC? And I can promise you, well, I'll make 2 unequivocal statements. I will never chant SEC. You will never hear that out of me. I will only root for the team that I went to. The second one is that the SEC will finally actually be rated properly because they'll actually have a team that can come in there and live up to the hype and expectations in Florida State. So they'll finally meet what they're supposed to be when Florida State gets in.
Follow Danny on Twitter at Danny Kanell. Hear him every morning, Sirius XM with Dusty Dvorak, Dusty, and Danny in the morning there. Thank you very much for the time, Danny. It was a pleasure.
You guys, sorry I didn't deliver any more fireworks.
That was phenomenal.
I'll work on some material for next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come in breathing fire next time.
I'm sure people will still think it's controversial, right?
Thank you, Daddy. Take care.